Alrighty, so this is going to be a short video on how to check your pressures on a Chevy truck AC system. You don't need a fancy gauge set like this, but it will help if you have to go into further diagnosis. You can get away with doing this with just a parts store can. The parts store can is going to connect to the low side port, which is the blue one. If you've got a gauge set, the red one is your high side port. When the truck is off and resting, your pressure should be somewhere between 70 and maybe 95, depending on the ambient air. The ambient air is going to dictate your pressures. If you're below that, the compressor won't kick on, most likely, because it needs to have a minimum pressure before the compressor will even kick on, so you're not going to get any air. So what I'm going to do now is start up the truck and crank up my AC so you can see what running pressures look like. It's 74 outside. I'm going to try to crank this down. You want it to be on full cold when you're doing this. Alright, so now that I've got it cranked up, this is what your pressure should look like. We're looking at the outside. Because it's only 75 degrees out, your pressures are going to be low. If it's like an 80-90 degree day, expect it to be up closer to 50 or 60. The number closest to the outside number is going to be the theoretical air temperature inside of the truck. So my air should be blowing about 35 degrees in there right now. A good rule of thumb is, at least for 134, these gauges should be roughly in the same position. That's definitely not gospel, but in a lot of cases that's where you're going to end up. Now if you kick on your AC and you see the blue gauge go down and the red gauge just skyrockets, that means that you've got a clog somewhere in the system. If you've got an expansion valve system, you're going to have an issue with the expansion valve. These trucks use an orifice tube. The orifice tube is mounted in the line between the two fittings. You may be able to see there's a little dent in the line. That dent stops the orifice tube, and in order to replace it, you literally just disconnect those two lines from each other and pull the orifice tube out. So if you're seeing that number skyrocket and then you hear the compressor kick off and that number drops slowly, and then as soon as the compressor kicks back on, that number skyrockets again, the first thing I would do is probably, obviously check to make sure your condenser's not all screwed up from, hitting rocks and crap. But the first thing I would do is replace that orifice tube. Another important thing to note is if your pressures are like nothing, before you waste your money filling it up, I would definitely recommend vacuuming down the system. Simply because, especially if you live somewhere where it's humid, any air in the system, if it has any humidity in it, it's going to pretty much instantly freeze, and then it's going to cause that same kind of clog. So you're going to want to, like, if your system ever gets down to 0 psi, you're going to want to vacuum it down and then charge it up after you know it's holding a good vacuum. That way you don't have any moisture in the lines and you're not going to be causing any freezing issues. But yeah, that's what you're going to be looking for as far as pressures go while it's running at 75 degrees. Obviously if it's warmer out, those pressures are going to go up.